Imagine you're accused of a crime. Your trial, it involves carrying a glowing red-hot bar of iron. It sounds completely nuts, right? But for centuries, this was justice. We're going to dive into the strange, and to them, perfectly logical world of the medieval trial by ordeal.
I mean, think about it. Put yourself back 1,000 years ago. Forget about fingerprints, DNA evidence, security cameras. None of that exists. A crime happens, and it's just your word against someone else's. So how in the world do you figure out who's telling the truth? This was the massive problem facing medieval justice.
And their solution was, well, it was something else. Kind of brilliant, but also absolutely terrifying. When all the human proof ran out, they figured, why not appeal to a higher power? And that right there is the beginning of the trial by ordeal.
Okay, so this is the absolute core of the whole thing. A trial by ordeal was not a punishment, and it wasn't a test to see how tough you were. It was a deeply religious ceremony. You can think of it like a direct appeal to God, asking Him to perform a little miracle to reveal the truth through a clear, physical sign.
This brings us to the main event, the central belief. God is the ultimate judge. You have to remember, in this world, faith was everything. It was the operating system for society. So it made perfect sense that the final verdict wouldn't come from some local lord, but from God himself.
Exactly. You weren't supposed to get through this by being strong or having a high pain tolerance. The whole point was that you needed to be saved by a miracle. That divine intervention, or the lack of it, was the verdict. The thinking was simple. If you're innocent, God's got your back. He'll step in and make sure you're okay.
So that's the theory. But what did this actually look like in practice? Well, the methods were, let's just say, dramatic and very symbolic. Let's get into the nitty-gritty of how these ordeals actually played out.
So one of the most common ones was the ordeal of hot iron. They'd heat up a heavy iron bar until it was glowing. Then, the accused person had to carry it for a set distance. Immediately after, their burned hand would be bandaged up and sealed. Then, everyone waited for 3 days. At the end of the 3 days, they'd unwrap the bandage. If the wound was healing cleanly, that was the miracle from God, innocent. But if it was infected and festering, well, that was God's judgment too, guilty.
Another really popular one was the Ordeal of Cold Water. For this, they'd tie you up and lower you into a river or a pond. But, and this is key, a priest had to bless the water first to make it spiritually pure. Now, the logic here is probably the exact reverse of what you're thinking.
Here's the wild part. The idea was that the pure, holy water would accept an innocent person, pulling them in. So if you sank, you were innocent. They'd pull you out before you drowned, of course. But if you floated, well, the pure water was physically rejecting you and your sin. So floating meant you were guilty. I know, it's a total mind-bender. Sinking is good, floating is bad.
And believe me, it got even weirder than that. There was the ordeal of the corn snailed, where you had to eat a piece of blessed bread or cake. If you were guilty, it was believed you'd literally choke on it. Or you might have to walk blindfolded across 9 red-hot plowshares laid on the ground. The variety was pretty wild, but the basic principle was always the same. Let God sort it out.
So you've got this whole system that seems, on the surface, to be based on pure divine will. But, you know, it was still being run by humans, and that's where the cracks start to appear.
Which brings up the big question, right? Did people actually buy all of this, hook, line, and sinker? Well, the evidence shows that even back then, people had their doubts. The reality on the ground was a whole lot messier than the religious theory.
The number one problem? Good old-fashioned human corruption. The priests were the ones running the ordeal, so what if the iron wasn't heated up quite as hot for a wealthy lord? Or what if the person managing the ropes for the water ordeal had already made up their mind? This supposedly divine process was actually wide open to earthly tampering.
And here's the real catch. Let's say you do it. You pass the test. God gives you a miracle. You're not necessarily off the hook. A successful ordeal didn't mean you were declared innocent. It just meant the charge against you was officially not proven. That's a huge difference. The suspicion didn't just disappear.
And that lingering doubt had very real consequences. In many cases, a person who passed the ordeal, who was supposedly just proven innocent by God himself, was still banished from the country for 40 days. I mean, that tells you everything you need to know, doesn't it? The community still didn't fully trust you.
So, you've got a system with some serious flaws, and people's trust is wearing thin. What finally brought the whole thing to an end? Well, in a pretty great twist of irony, the very same institution that gave the ordeal all its power, the church, was the one that took it all away.
And when the end came, it came fast. For centuries, the priests were the key ingredient. Their blessing was what turned a normal hunk of iron into an instrument of divine judgment. But then, in the year 1215, a big church council basically dropped a bombshell. They forbade all priests from taking part in ordeals, period. And just like that, the magic was gone. Without a priest's blessing, a hot iron was just a hot iron. The system lost all its religious legitimacy overnight, which forced the courts to find a new way to determine guilt. And that new way paved the road directly to the trial by jury that we have today.
So when we look back on it, the trial by ordeal seems completely barbaric, a product of a superstitious past. But it does make you think, what are we doing right now in our justice system, in our society, that people 1,000 years from now are going to look back on and just shake their heads? What widely accepted practice of our time will be their trial by ordeal? What, I wonder, is ours?